The story or stories you are about to hear are to entertain. The writers of these stories may claim they are true, yet they may not be. That is up to you to decide. After all, this world is a strange one. From disturbing things seen while hiking, to homes that are filled to the very tip-top with demons, these are a variety of allegedly true scary stories that will haunt your night and week to come. Enjoy these stories, and be sure to share your own story with me at darkstories.org, because I'd love to narrate it on the show. Now, let's begin. Deer in the Winter Snow, from Black Sun. Well, I've held on to this story for a while, knowing that most won't believe me or my friends. Well, it starts one winter in North Georgia. Me and a couple of friends of mine wanted to go camping. It was going to snow, and it was going to snow a lot. 11 inches in total, I think. We were excited, because it didn't snow much here, especially in large amounts like this. We knew we couldn't actually use any tents because of the temperature, but one of my oldest family members had a cabin in the rural area of Gilmer County. It didn't have any power, but it was excluded, surrounded only by woods, a pig trail leading to the cabin, which was just big enough for the ATVs. The four of us grabbed everything from our homes and met up at the base of the trail. I saw that my friend Roger brought his dog, Klein, a massive mastiff, the largest dog I'd ever known, but very friendly and gentle. We got ready to go onto the trail, which would be a 2-hour trip into the woods. About an hour into the trip, we stopped because Terry had to go pee, but Roger's dog was getting upset for whatever reason. He kept on grunting and growling. We figured he was needing to use the restroom too. After we got started again, the snow started to fall, and by 10 minutes in, it was already lying on the ground and getting dark. About 15 minutes away from the cabin, Roger's dog Klein is now in full protective mode, barking and growling. We went around the next bend in the trail to stop to see a deer in the middle of the trail, just staring at us, and Klein was on his stomach, whimpering now. That deer, though, I was confused about it. It wouldn't move or run from us. It just stayed there and stared. We eventually just drove around it. The deer only moved a little bit, making sure to keep us in its sight. I felt uneasy, but my friends got me over it as soon as we got to the cabin. The snow was about 5 inches by then, so we first got the fire started in the fireplace. We got all of our stuff off the ATVs and settled in for tomorrow. We planned on driving all over the mountain. We soon went to sleep, but I still got this uneasy feeling. I had a dream about that darned deer. The following day, we had fun racing through the mountains and playing in the snow until dark. Then we went back to the cabin to prepare for the next day, as we'd have to leave for home then. We got some supper cooked up, which was a learning process, I'll tell you that. But we soon had it figured out and settled in for the night, when Roger told Klein to go out and use the restroom before going to bed. It didn't take long for Klein to begin barking like mad. He was on the porch growling and barking, scratching at the door, and Rogers got up to get him. But before he could open up the door, we heard him yelp, and what sounded like him getting ripped off the porch aggressively by something. We opened the door quickly and saw only scratch marks on the porch, and there were a few spots of red. "What happened?" I asked. "What's going on?" Roger replied with, "I don't know. Klein's gone." I go out on the front porch. It's close to dark, but visible enough to see to the forest line. I followed the trail of red with my eyes, and I could see where it ended. I grabbed a flashlight, and I saw that deer again. It was standing over Klein, who wasn't moving. They were about 150 feet away from the cabin. The deer was staring at us again, its mouth now covered in a red fluid. In a panic, I pushed Roger back into the cabin and slammed the door shut, locking it, hoping he hadn't seen what I saw. I wanted to keep it to myself, but everyone was looking at me, wanting to know what I saw. I asked them if they remembered the deer from before. It was that, but Klein seemed to be dead. When I told them I think the deer had killed Klein, they looked scared and confused. All of a sudden, one of the other guys yelled. I looked at him, and he was pointing at the window. I looked over and I saw that deer. Between the time of me getting in the house and telling everyone, which was only a few seconds really, that deer had made it to the window to watch us. That in itself seemed unnatural. It began to walk around the outside walls, scratching at them, maybe with its hooves or maybe with its antlers. It did this for a while, then finally walked away. And when it walked away, the last thing we heard was a blood-curdling scream, as unnatural as that deer was. We did not sleep that night, and as soon as the sun was high, we took off, leaving most of our stuff, only to get the heck out of there. It only took us half the time to get out of the woods, as it did to get in. When I made it back home, my great-uncle asked what was wrong. He could see it on my face that something had happened. I told him everything. He looked at me and hugged me, telling me he was glad that I was okay. But he told me that he had experienced something similar, and that at the time no one believed him. But now he was thankful he wasn't going crazy. As for Roger and the other guys, we pretty much split up after that. Roger moved away to the city. As for me, I still wonder what's out there, and I want evidence of it. I still go to that cabin, ready to take pictures or record video, but I've never seen it again. But randomly, on occasions that I cannot plan for, I do hear it scream. I Can't Explain This, from Jane L. When I was in college, I lived in a small apartment complex that was close to an old cemetery. I'd have to pass the cemetery every day on my way home from school, but it was usually during early evening hours when it was still light out and some people were somewhat around. On this particular day, I forgot my bag in class, which had my wallet, makeup, and other important valuables in it. It was because I had to use the bathroom before leaving, like a dunce, so I forgot it and left without it. By the time I realized I'd forgotten it, I was already 3/4 home, and it was almost dark out. Nevertheless, I needed my bag, and so I had to go back and get it. I didn't want anyone to steal it, or risk having my identity stolen. That would be a whole new, bigger mess. On the way there, the cemetery was quite spooky. There was just an old rusty gate between the sidewalk and the graves, but there was a bit of light still, and a couple of people were walking on the same block. This did put my nerves at ease for a while. I successfully made it to my bag and retrieved it, thankful that no one had taken it. I checked and made sure everything was in it too, and it was. I continued on my way back home after that. It was supposed to be a simple walk through town. So simple, how was I to know what was about to come next? It was dark, and I came to the street and turned the corner. It was dimly lit by a single street lamp, and now no one was around. I paused, looking toward the cemetery gate that I'd passed earlier. I could still see the first few headstones, but the rest had now disappeared into pitch-black darkness. There was no way around this block, as I needed to walk past this quiet street in order to get onto a footbridge that crossed a highway. It was my only way. Hesitant, I took a deep breath, and I swiftly began to walk. I crossed over to the other side of the street, and I began to hum loudly to put myself out of my fears, to ease my nerves, but it only worked a little bit. I made it roughly halfway through the block when suddenly I heard the voice of a child in the direction of the cemetery. He was screaming. "Help me," he kept saying and calling out. I froze, terrified. I tried to breathe in, but no air would come inside. I tried to turn my head, but it took so much more energy than usual, as if I had been stuck in the most viscous fluid in existence. It felt as if someone had stopped the flow of time for me, but the rest of the world had kept going. Just then, I noticed something lurking in the cemetery. It was unmistakable. 2 eyes reflecting light that wasn't there. It was looking at me, and whatever it was knew I was looking at it. I tried to yell, trying to scream, but only muffled whimpers came out. I was trapped, and there was obviously no way I was getting out of there alive. Deep inside, I knew that I was a goner. It felt weird to do it, but I suddenly just gave up and succumbed to my fear. My mind fell blank, and my body was rigid, like some sort of android. I accepted what was going to happen to me, and I made peace with the darkness. I slowly turned away from the cemetery and continued walking in the direction I was going, like a mindless zombie. In my mind, I felt I had nothing to gain and nothing to lose. But as I walked, I suddenly heard whatever was in the cemetery beginning to laugh loudly, laugh at me. This time, it was not only a child's voice, but the voice of an old woman and an older man, all at the same time. It slowly began saying, You. It just grew louder and louder as I walked away. The further away I got from it, the fainter it became, but it was constantly saying that to me and laughing until I was too far away to hear it. I will unfortunately always remember that night and always wonder what it was. I tried to rationalize the experience by saying it was probably just a crazy person doing crazy things to scare people, or something along those lines. But that really doesn't explain anything. I've walked past there many times before, but always with people, always in the daytime. One thing is for sure. You won't find me walking by a cemetery alone at night, ever again. Demons in My Childhood Home, from Euphonium at Bandcamp. I lived in my childhood home in Las Vegas, Nevada, from 1998 to 2013. My family moved in there when I was 5, and we left when I turned 19. So I spent a solid portion of my life in that home. I even still have regular nightmares that take place there, as if the demons who haunted me then will never let me be, even in my dreams. So we lived in a big 1970s style home, and the bad juju began right off the bat. A construction worker had died while digging the in-ground pool, apparently falling into the 8-foot pit while holding a rather sharp tool. He died only minutes after falling. Add onto this the fact that our hastily built and shakily built home was being financed by some very shady people. Anyway, the home was on the outskirts of a town. There was really nothing but desert beyond it, dirt roads and all that. It was definitely the perfect spot for shady business deals or a shallow grave. While living there, we actually found a fairly big gallon-sized mason jar, filled to the brim with gold watches, pendants, necklaces, rings, even golden teeth in the crawl space under the stairway when we moved in. So enough of the history of the place. Let's move on to the experiences my family and even friends regularly encountered there. We had at least 4 different entities in this home, I think, 2 of which were demonic. Normal, everyday and every night occurrences including footsteps, flickering lights, knocks, heavy breathing and talking, objects being moved and manipulated. You could also physically feel something oppressive in certain parts of the house. At night, I had to let out my last set of dogs, as we had 8 of them. This included a Doberman Pinscher and a Pit Bull that lived in our living room. The bottom of the doorway had a door with 2 locks in the knob and a deadbolt type of lock. Every night, my last chore would be to let them out and feed and water them, then lock up. As soon as the deadbolt slid into the latch when I was locking up, I could feel something literally hanging on my back. Feeling that sensation of instant weight on my back gives me chills just thinking about it. It was heavy, evil, sinister. This began to happen every night I lived there for 9 years straight, never failing. It was so bad that I would often slide my back on the walls or doorway to try and get it off my back. It literally felt like something was there, a growth or something latching onto me. There were also these kitchen disturbances. Cabinets would often open up, all 13 of them completely ajar without explanation. Things would clatter and bang, but one day we heard a huge crash, followed by our cats and dogs running for their dear lives, away from that unseen force. When we went to check, we ended up stepping on glass, which had somehow been flung from the kitchen to this corner, meaning that whatever had broken dishes or glass in the kitchen had done so violently. Upon closer inspection, they'd tossed 2 glass pans meant for baking. These were old and very sturdy, even if thrown with full force at the floor. It should have simply cracked at most. But these suckers, they'd been tossed on the ground and seemingly trampled because the glass itself was minuscule, nearly dust at this point. Imagine thousands or even tens of thousands of tiny glass pieces broken from a pan. It was so bad we even found glass shards here and there for years to come. One night I fell asleep in my father's hospital bed in the den. My dad was asleep in his room, and my mom was asleep in hers. I was half asleep until I started to hear something in my ear. This caused me to be brought fully awake, and the sound grew louder and louder. I knew something was wrong. The more I hoped it was just a dream, the more I realized it was real, and I began to grow terrified. My eyes shot open, and I noticed that there were no animals in the room with me. With as many pets as we had, one of them was always nearby. But this time, something had perhaps spooked them out of the room. Within seconds of opening my eyes, I was bombarded by the deepest growl that I'd ever heard. I won't forget it. Nothing comes close to the bass it produced, and the evil you could feel within it. It was being projected straight into my right ear, and I could even feel hot breath in my ear. I sat there paralyzed for a couple of minutes. After that time, it seemed to stop. Eventually, I got the courage to jump up and run to my dad's room with him, to sleep next to him. I was way too scared to sleep on my own for a while, even though I was 16 at the time. Now the dogs and cats sensed some entities as well. You don't really know real fear until you walk up the stairs to see 3 dogs and 6 cats, all of them staring at the same spot on the ceiling, their heads slowly following something that a human eye cannot see, back and forth in the dark corner of the upstairs hallway. I saw this on multiple occasions, and at one point when I was up there, one of the cats hissed, and they ran with their tails puffed, hackles raised, fleeing full speed away, hiding under tables and beds. Before I left, being creeped out, I felt an ice-cold breeze blow by me, as if whatever had scared that cat wanted me to know that it was there. All the crap that went on in that house, I could be here all day writing. It was like the house itself wasn't exactly haunted, but cursed by some bad spirits or something. That place was truly the home of whatever could go wrong would go wrong. Water would leak from the ceilings. Some of the floors were stained with water so bad that it felt more like stepping on mud. We even had lightning strikes right next to the home dozens of times. You could go out and see the burn marks after it happened. Not to mention the house was sinking into the earth inches per year. We would joke and say that they didn't lay a foundation in it because, quote unquote, that's where they buried the bodies. I'm not sure I believed that, but now I'm starting to. I wasn't the only one to see things. My boyfriend and friend came over at one point. We were sitting on a big queen-sized bed. We had been hearing things, so we were huddled up together, kind of creeped out. Suddenly, we heard a cat yowling from the dark hallway, and a few seconds later, a shoe came hurtling from the darkness, hitting the wall behind us with a loud thud. No one else was in the house. On another occasion, I had a friend over who had fallen asleep on the downstairs couch at around 3 a.m. I went to bed upstairs since there wasn't enough room for both of us. I came back down at 7:30, and he was now wide awake and pale as a ghost. He says he had just seen some faceless dark thing floating from the kitchen and following me upstairs when I had just recently left, but then it departed from me to float into my mom's room. All of this still bothers me, terrifies me, though we don't live there anymore. I have nightmares and dreams about all this stuff, and I'm worried that one day I'll move into a home that's just as haunted, or worse. The woods are not a good place to rest. From Mr. Jump 6000. Just writing this out, I feel as if I'm being watched. This happened to me and a friend of mine when we turned 19. It was about 5 years ago now. It was 2015, and we were feeling a bit bored. So we went out for a walk in the woods to ease our minds and bodies. We were pretty tired though, and we weren't paying much attention to where we were going. So we were soon lost. Or maybe we were just too tired to want to go back yet. We soon hunkered down under a tree, listening to some podcasts together. Now, the two of us had been in Boy Scouts together and had hunted together often. We'd taken plenty of survivalist training together. Now back to the story. As we sat there under the tree, headphones in, we soon fell asleep, side by side. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night. My friend was still next to me, sound asleep, but I was hearing something strange, a sort of screeching sound, and it wasn't too distant. When the screeching sound went full out, sounding right next to us, I was horrified. I shook my friend to get him awake, but he wouldn't budge, so I dumped some water on him. He was mad for a moment, but I told him to shush and listen, and the sound came again. He was groggy, of course, having just wakened, but I was terrified and ready to leave, so I dragged him by the arm, and I ran full speed through the woods back to the truck we had taken to the entrance of the woods. We didn't hear anything else until we made it out of the woods. We were climbing into my truck, when suddenly something landed on the roof and began to make this snapping sound. It was sort of moist, like someone trying to mimic an insect noise with their mouth. I put the pedal to the metal, and I went way too fast through that trail. Eventually, the snapping sound stopped, and I watched through the rearview mirror as a silhouette jumped away from the hood of my truck, jumping from tree to tree. It wasn't a bird, that was for sure, but whatever it was big, and it did have these odd-looking wings. I'm not sure what it was, but it hasn't deterred me from going hunting or walking in the woods. But I can't say the same for my friend, who seems to be afraid of the forest these days. But I can't really blame him. Creature in my house, from Murph 17. This happened about 2 years ago, but it was so haunting that I remember it quite vividly still. My immediate family and I are a large family of Christians. We believe in God and angels. We believe in Satan and demons. So whenever my family and I move into a new home, my parents would have us all pray for it, praying for any and all evil there to leave the house in the name of Jesus Christ. My parents said that doing so would make any evil being in the house leave, because we had power over them in His name. But that doesn't mean that it will keep other evil beings out. My parents would often tell me that whenever we had visitors that aren't believers, there's always the possibility that demons could enter our home with those visitors. As to not scare the other children, my parents would only tell us older kids about this, which at the time were my younger twin sisters and I. I've been into all things horror and supernatural since I was 13, so the thought of demons actually existing in our world was fascinating, but also slightly frightening. I didn't really know what to think of it, because nothing paranormal had ever happened to me before. I brushed this off, thinking that paranormal things hardly happen to people, so it probably would not happen to me. I want to give you a good idea of what the downstairs looked like before I get into what happened. When you walk down the stairs, there's a big room that's like a second living room. It had a puzzle-like couch, some toys, and a big TV. Past this second living room was a hallway where most of the kids' bedrooms were. As you walk down the hallway on the left, there was my younger twin sister's room, my room, and a room that all of my younger brothers shared. And to the right across from my room, was the bathroom. The bathroom was bigger than average. It had a long counter with 2 sinks, a toilet, and a shower with a textured sheer slider door. One day, my parents invited a couple over to our house to just hang out, have food, and talk. Us kids were here to stay downstairs, so we weren't chaotic around the couple. Everything seemed normal, and my parents had fun with the couple. After they left, though, it was time for all the kids except for me to go to bed. After helping to get all of the little kids to bed, I walked down the stairs to go to the bathroom and brush my teeth. As I walked down the hallway, I saw that the lights were off and the door was slightly opened. I didn't think much about it, of course, because I figured one of my siblings must have left it open. I opened the door, and before I could reach to turn the lights on, I froze. There was this thing that was maybe 10 feet away from me, squatting and hunched over next to our toilet. I audibly gasped. It looked tall, extremely tall, even though it was hunching over. Its whole body was so thin, and it had really long fingers too. I couldn't make out any other details because it was just too dark to see anything else. But then it noticed me and quickly turned its head to look at me. Then I saw its eyes were huge and they were glowing yellow. After a few seconds, I quickly turned on the lights, and as soon as I did, the thing disappeared with the darkness. I screamed in terror, running back a few feet. I didn't know what to do. Where'd it go? I thought. I was in denial, saying that that's impossible, that can't be real. I ran up the stairs and immediately got my dad. I cried and cried, telling him what had happened. After I calmed down a bit, we went downstairs together and prayed. I felt this dark feeling disappeared after we prayed. I felt a little bit better, but I decided to look up what I'd seen. Nothing matched exactly, but I did find stories of skinwalkers, wendigo, crawlers, and things like that. Eventually, I was able to go to sleep, but it took a few hours. I wish I could say that that was all that happened, but something else happened a couple of days later. A quick note, my brothers have an air filter in their room. It helps them sleep. So while all my younger brothers were sleeping one night, the oldest one, August, could not sleep because of an eerie feeling he had. Everything was pretty dark at the time, except for the blue light from his air filter. August said that when he looked over at it, he saw a creature that appeared goat-like, close to the air filter. He said it had the head of a goat, but he had a torso with no limbs. Now this is the part that really freaked me out. He said that the goat creature had glowing yellow eyes, just like the thing I had seen. I felt my stomach drop. My parents don't really talk about paranormal things except with the older kids, and he was pretty young, so when he told my parents, they instantly believed him and told him that we'd all pray together downstairs. We did, and thankfully nothing else happened while we lived in that house. Well, it wasn't really nothing, I guess, because after that, on rare occasions, I would experience sleep paralysis, and I would feel something watching me. It happened in every house after that, too. I would look and I wouldn't see anyone there. It was dark in my room, after all, but I would feel this pain in my chest, and I could feel that whatever was watching me was getting closer by the second. The closer this thing got, the more my chest hurt. I could feel it get so close that it felt as if my ribcage was going to break in two, and my heart was going to burst. At that point, I was always able to move a finger, and when I did, the feeling would go away. I really hope that whatever was in that bathroom and what's watching me sleep now aren't the same thing. It's been 2 years, and I don't like thinking that this creature is the persistent type. When the Fog Comes Out, from Jessam123. I live in Sacramento, California, and I had an encounter of huge proportion with an unknown creature. I was spending some time with an elderly friend of mine in Stockton, California. It was a week before Christmas. I had done my duties as a caregiver there, and it was getting late and very cold. It must have been around 3:10 a.m. when I was leaving and saying my goodbyes. I began to drive away from that little trailer park area in my little white car, when fog began to envelop my vehicle. The fog was so dense I couldn't see more than 10 feet in front of me, and I was beginning to get worried. I slowed the car down, but somehow I was able to hear footsteps outside. I didn't pay much attention at first. By 3:20 a.m., the footsteps had kept on coming, so I drew down the driver's side window. I could hear the steps more clearly. I could see someone running on the side of the road. I was surprised. I remember thinking, who could be out so early in the morning, dressed in black, running on the side of the road in this kind of fog? Curiosity began to take over. I needed to have a look at this. Suddenly, a stench like death and decay came in through the window. I wanted to gag. It was like rancid, rotting meat. Dread and fear started taking over my curiosity. By then, I was driving next to the thing, and I could make it out in more detail. This thing was huge. Its legs were taller than my car. It was hairy, black in color. It was catching up at 40 miles per hour, and soon it noticed I was looking at it. It pounced towards my car, latching onto my side mirror and shoving its face into the driver's side window. I got a good look at it. A look then that I realized I didn't want. Its face was the stuff of nightmares. Its eyes seemed to glow or reflect orange. It didn't have a snout. Instead, it had 2 skeletal slits for a nose, and its mouth had a horrifying smile to it, which was open enough for me to see 2 rows of sharp teeth, each tooth being around 2 inches long. It seemed to be mocking me, as if saying that you could be my dinner tonight. My dread was palpable. I was not about to die this way. I sped up to 65 miles per hour. But somehow, it was still keeping speed with me. I began to scream like some sort of scared child. This was my boogeyman, and I did not want to go out this way, being eaten by something like that. I sped up to 80 miles per hour. Keep in mind, I had no visibility. I was surprised I didn't die through a car crash. I was crying, tears falling down my cheeks, my pants becoming moist from me soiling myself. Suddenly, it let go of the mirror and ran off to the side of the road into a walnut orchard. It disappeared. I was too scared to slow down, though. I kept going at that insane speed until I hit the highway, thankful that I hadn't crushed my car into a tree. My adrenaline was still pumping. I felt as if I was going insane, and even with the thick mist or fog outside, even having sped a few miles away from that thing, I swear I could still smell it. I smelled that rancid, rotten smell all the way home. But I didn't make it all the way home right away. A few miles up the road, I stopped again, having spotted a waving woman on the side of the freeway. Her car had died. Now, I'll be honest here, I did not stop because I was a good Samaritan. I stopped because I feared that that thing would eat her, and I know that that would be a painful death. I had a charge box in my car. I took it out and helped her out. I tried to explain to her that the walnut orchard might have something in it that we don't want to be around for, but she looked at me like I was funny. Once we got her car started, she took off, and I did as well. Eventually, the fog began to dissipate, and the smell was gone with it. I began to calm down, and I started to wonder. The fog, and then the smell, and then that creature, were they related? Whenever another fog like that comes again, am I going to be scared? Should I be? Drive safe, everyone, and don't be rubbernecking for things on the side of the road, because some of those things, well, they might just want to eat you. What the heck was that thing? From The Mental. I'm a guy in my mid-20s, living in the United States. I love the outdoors. Hunting, fishing, camping, hiking. These were my regular activities, especially with my dad. We used to partake in them regularly when I was growing up. I never did lose that passion, and I ensure that I always had time for my outings. These outings seem to calm me, or they used to. Recently, I've been encouraging my friends to join me on these adventures, as just like my dad, I believe it's great for the soul to get in touch with your surroundings, to remind yourself that you are still a part of nature. Luckily for us, our town is surrounded in great hiking trails and lots of explorable national parks. I was with my friends TJ and FR. I'd once again convinced my two friends to accompany me on a hike and had picked a brilliant trail. It was the furthest we would have been so far, a 4-hour round trip through some of the finest pine forests in North America. As usual, the start of the hike was met with sulking from my two friends, but I knew they'd liven up eventually. They always did. They enjoyed the outdoors, even if they didn't admit it. Sure enough, 10 minutes in and we were all joking and enjoying the fresh air, as well as the freedom of the bright spring day. The trail was well walked and relatively easy terrain. We even passed a few other walkers, coming back to the entrance of the trail. I guess that makes what happened even more strange. At roughly the point in which the trail is at its deepest into the wilderness, I began to hear a rustling of leaves about 50 feet off the trail. I stopped and I whispered to my friends to be quiet. The way the light filtered through the dense trees created a very atmospheric scene, perfect for what I thought was going to be a close encounter with a deer. However, as I began to focus on the sound, I started to feel confused, worried even. The rustling sound was uneven, like a short burst of noise, a pause, and then a continuation. We could very easily follow the path of the animal on sound alone, which was not something you'd hear from a deer. As we all stood on the trail, staring into the thick trees, we began to make out movement. Now, this is going to sound crazy, but it was a man wearing full hiking gear. But he was sporadically dancing and leaping between trees. It looked to be like some sort of ballet, except he was perfectly clearing fallen logs and rocks, skipping in and out of the trees like it was nothing, so gracefully. I looked toward the others to see if they were seeing what I was seeing, and sure enough, they both had grins plastered on their faces, staring at the now pirouetting man. "What the heck is he doing?" my friend whispered, trying to hold back a laugh. I looked at him, a smile forming on his face. "Maybe he's drunk," I mouthed, and I looked back at the man. He had stopped about 30 feet away from us, still within the tree line. He was staring right back at us. Confusion began welling up in me again. The way he was standing there, it was so odd. The only way I can describe it is he was like a cowboy in an old western standoff. His legs were at shoulder width, and his arms were by his side, as if he was ready to grab some kind of sidearm. But it was his face that really began to disturb me. It was all normal, sure, except for the fact that the man looked dead. His eyes were droopy, his mouth was slack-jawed and hung open just slightly. His skin was also pale. My smile began to fade, and he continued to stare us down. Now, I wish to God that I could say he began to sprint at us or yell at us or something, but he did something much more terrible. Without moving his body, his head started to turn to the right, further and further. It got to the point in which a normal human's head would have stopped, but with an audible pop and snap, his head began to twist further and further until we were staring into the back of his head, his body not moving an inch. My smile had long since been replaced with a look of horror. "What?" is all I could breathe, and just like that, like he had never stopped at all, the man began pirouetting and leaping through the trees away from us, his head still facing 180 degrees the wrong way. I could see his slacked jaw bouncing up and down like it was completely dislocated. We stood there until the rustling noise was distant and fading. My mind was working overtime to figure out what my eyes had just seen. I looked at the others. They were white as ghosts, wearing the same look of absolute horror that I knew I was sporting. Without a word, all three of us began running at full speed back down the trail, terrified beyond belief. We didn't see him again, and I'm certain he was not human. I often wonder what the point of that encounter was. It was the most disturbing thing I'd ever seen, and it has stuck in my head ever since that day. I've developed a bit of insomnia since then, and I stopped going outside too often, terrified that I'll run into that dancing man of a creature again. My friends don't even speak of it, and all three of us barely talk anymore. I just wish I could erase that memory, get rid of the sound of his cracking neck from my mind. What the heck was out there? What a variety of stories we've had today. Dancing zombie hikers, hungry carnivorous deer, Christians being haunted by bathroom demons. Well, I can kind of relate to the bathroom demon thing pretty well, but that's a different story for a whole different lifetime. Good night. If you enjoyed this episode of Darkness Prevails, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you have your own story to share, go to darkstories.org. I'd love to narrate your story on this channel. If you want to support the show, check the links in the description. And until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons who donate and help me out a lot. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.